The reality is we've walked away from the Kurds right at the time where they were giving us intelligence that apparently was key to this operational victory, according to them. And what my sources are telling me is that takes the counterterrorism pressure off ISIS, and that risks an ISIS resurgence. And so this may be, as you said, an operational tactical victory, but strategically, Donald Trump has set the fight against ISIS back significantly.
Notice how Trump can't get credit for this, according to the press. You cannot say that President Trump made the right call, did the right thing. They won't concede it. Their sense of patriotism, as weak as it may be, their sense of duty and honor, none of that overcomes the hashtag resistance mentality. Much more important to them to bash Trump than to give credit where it is due. It's one of the reasons why I always tell you, I give credit where it's due on this show. Democrat does something good, I say, good job, Democrat. I don't run around pretending that everything a Democrat says or does is bad. In fact, I like finding things that Democrats do that is praiseworthy because it is a reminder that Democrats don't have to be crazy. Some of them aren't. Democrats don't have to be hashtag resistance lunatics. Many of them choose to be normal people. We would like to bring them over to our side of thinking. That would be far better. I do want converts. I don't just want converts to this show. I want converts to conservatism. But start off with converts to this show. So tell your liberal friends, be like, hey, listen to this guy. Maybe he'll get you to stop seeing the world the wrong way. New York Times also went around, and that was Ken Delaney at MSNBC who started it. Ken Delaney was also a big proponent of the Russia collusion hoax, which was a hoax. We can say that it is a hoax. There was no Russia collusion. So the hoax word is, I think, a very useful one. The death of, this is from the New York Times. I mean, how many of these are the biggest liberal news outlets in the world. Jake Tapper had more important things to do than cover the president's full speech and Q&A afterwards. Cut away from it.
So he could tell us what he thinks about the events, because he's very serious journalist. Yeah.
The death, this is from the New York Times. The death of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the Islamic State leader, happened largely in spite of President Trump's actions, not because of them, according to military, intelligence, and counterterrorism officials. What does that really mean? How? How is that the case? I'd like an explanation of that. I'd like them to tell us why, other than just finding people who can claim the title of military, intelligence, and counterterrorism official. Yeah. Government employees, basically. Finding government employees who hate Trump, not hard to do. Finding people that also would rather believe that Trump just got lucky or this had nothing to do, or it happened in spite of him. You know what did happen in spite of? The bin Laden raid happened in spite of Joe Biden's opposition to it. But you won't hear much press coverage of that one. Joe Biden, in one of his moments of unintentional honesty, was like, yeah, I just didn't think we should do that raid. Good job, Joe. We'll get to Biden later on in the show. But it happened in spite of it. Not only does Trump not get the credit, Trump should be blamed, you see. The media wants you to blame Trump because if it were up to him, this wouldn't have happened. Well, I guess we should just be happy the press thinks it's good that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi is gone. That's something of a victory for us, I suppose, for sanity. But there's a broader question here, and this ties into the sources that are speaking out against President Trump and what's happened here in this raid. Because more broadly, foreign policy was supposed to be the realm where Trump was out of his depth. We have been told from day one that Trump is this is what the media and the intelligentsia and a lot of former government officials, they have been telling us that Trump has no curiosity about the world, no understanding about the world, doesn't read any books, doesn't know anything about anything. And therefore, we should not support him because he's going to do all these terrible things that will harm our national security. I've heard so much criticism of Trump harming our national security, and I look around and say, where has it been harmed exactly? Other than in these rhetorical terms of, oh, the perception of us in the world, this is just all propaganda. This is all just, this is bloviating. This is opinions. This is pomposity dressed up as analysis. What is this? No, Trump has made the country less safe. How? By doing what? Oh, and where have we taken thousands of casualties because of a stupid decision that Trump has made? where have we enmeshed ourselves much more deeply in a war that we had no strategic vision to complete? I think the answer is they never give us any specifics on this because it hasn't happened. You cannot look at the first 4 years of Trump's foreign policy and compare it to Obama or Bush and not come away thinking, this Trump guy's got some good ideas. He's actually making some things happen. And this is where you get to the egos involved in the Trump opposition, which is beyond just the hard left. This is beyond just the progressive Democrats and socialists running around who despise Trump because he's not woke, because he's, a vulgarian who doesn't speak about the 37 genders and all the rest of it. There are a lot of other people. And this is where you get folks like Bill Taylor, for example, who testified recently as a State Department guy, saying that his perception of Trump with Ukraine and the quid pro quo, the guy's a lifelong diplomat. Has he been right? Has it really mattered all that much? Is all of this State Department puffing up of itself all the time really worthwhile? Do we need a State Department that's nearly as big as we do? Are these bureaucrats that work for the federal government as important as they like to think they are? And their expertise. We always hear about their expertise. I can tell you this. I have a few people in my life who are just they're voracious readers. And they read a lot of stuff, and they read a lot of stuff in the newspaper, a lot of journals and books. And they are as knowledgeable about foreign policy as anybody I know from the State Department, and then some. All right, so this starts to fall also into this cult of expertise notion that Trump is outside that circle. But what are the people inside the cult, the intelligentsia on foreign policy, what are they to make of themselves when this guy who's like a reality TV star, who's tweeting at people like a crazy man sometimes, and I say that with love, but he does. And what are they to make of the fact that he understands at a gut level things that they don't? He has a more realistic understanding of some aspects, not just of how domestic policy works, but foreign policy works. Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? How do you handle bad guys? Oh, a lot of brilliant diplomats will tell you how to handle Kim Jong-un, for example, in North Korea. Do they know? What's their record of success like exactly? Oh, that's right. It's a record of decades of bipartisan failure. And what about on China? Oh, Trump's an idiot. He doesn't know anything. He's starting this trade war with China. Where's the record of success from previous administrations getting China to stop ripping us off, stealing our intellectual property, engaging in predatory trade practices? Who's been able to do? They didn't even think it was a problem before. At least they weren't able to stand up to it and deal with it as a problem. So where does that leave us? What are we really to think about all of this when the President of the United States is not just presiding? Oh, S&P 500 is at like an all-time high, I think, today. Stock market still booming. Household income up, taxes down. The debt's a problem. I will not let it go. Almost $1 trillion, unacceptable. But there's a lot of other stuff you look at, and that gets no attention whatsoever. No focus on the things that are going on in Trump's White House and what that means for the rest of America. No, we're told these things by people who are convinced they're right and are desperate to convince the rest of the American people that Trump is just so wrong, has no idea what he's doing, is way out of his depth. Where's the evidence for that? Stop giving me anonymous sources, which is what we have here. Sources in the government say, yeah, like Brennan worked for the government. Brennan was CIA director. I wouldn't trust that guy to tell me about anything. Guy was a former commie, legitimately, like a communist. And it's like, people listening to Bernie Sanders. Oh, I've got to tell you, I had some moments over the weekend. I was debating, I'll get into that, the debate that we had at Politicon over healthcare, which I think is probably online. You can watch it, but just Looney Tunes kind of stuff. I mean, just people saying crazy things. But on foreign policy, this is where the smart people were supposed to sneer at Trump and be right. He doesn't understand. He doesn't get it. And the Obama people, right? The Obama White House and the various senior advisors who are now treated like they're giving a sage commentary on the rest of the world. They would always point to, well, look at the bin Laden raid. Oh, you mean the sort of like the Baghdadi raid, where Trump had elite operators moving through multiple tiers of enemy airspace. Really, it's airspace controlled by the Syrians and the Russians. You've also got to be concerned about the Turks in this region. Had to deconflict with them. There were people, just so you know how crazy the press release, there were people who were saying, oh, see, he coordinated with the Russians. Putin's puppet. Oh, yeah, maybe he's Putin's puppet. Or maybe those journals should know that flying a bunch of U.S. air assets into someone else's airspace without telling them, when they have advanced surface-to-air defense systems like the Russians do, as well as their own planes and helicopters that could be countermeasures, maybe we just didn't want to get our guys blown out of the sky by the Russians. To not deconflict with the Russians beforehand would have been suicidal, would have been insane. And yet doing that very basic step is pointed to as further evidence of Trump is Putin's puppet. Trump's a bad guy. Can't trust Trump. Can't trust him. Even when he's ordering this raid. The Obama foreign policy, I can point to places all over the world and say, got worse. Afghanistan, worse. Iraq, worse. Syria, worse. Libya, worse. Egypt, worse. Give me a country that mattered in terms of U.S. foreign policy, where there were problems, and I will tell you, under the Obama administration, and I'll point to it and say, oh, yeah, you mean the one that got dramatically worse while Obama's team was running things? Look at who's in charge. Would you rather have Susan Rice, who called Lindsey Graham a piece of blank recently, publicly? Would you rather have Susan Rice making decisions, or Pompeo making decisions about foreign policy? Would you rather have Hillary Clinton making foreign policy decisions? I certainly hope not. Yet here we are, and this is what we are dealing with. It was disgraceful the way the press reacted to this, but as we know, it's all about narrative, and the narrative has to be that Trump's foreign policy is bad, and this can't be used the way that it was used, very effectively, I might add, to create a false perception that Obama's foreign policy was competent, because it was not. They don't want that to happen now, because Trump's foreign policy so far has been competent. And now he has this counterterrorism success. They're terrified about what this means for 2020. What's the foreign policy criticism going to be? Oh, NATO? Trump is too rough with NATO, and so he's going to break up the alliance? That's false. NATO allies are now paying more money than they did before Trump. All Trump has done is hold them to account for their promises or for their targets, the goals that they've set for themselves. There's no NATO alliance about to break up. But what matters is just the narrative. These people are just, the left. I got used to having a government apparatus for 8 years of the Obama administration that was more or less always reflecting something other than my view on policy matters. And I said, all right, well, we're out of power right now. We got to make the case, and I didn't wake up every day in some kind of a cold sweat freaking out about how we can't survive another Obama administration. No. They really think that about Trump. And if you really believe that, what are you unwilling to do and say? The press completely embarrassed themselves. I mean, these legacy media outlets, they really should just slowly go away. I mean, that would be I'm hoping the market does that to them. Well, they have so much money behind them. It takes a while for them to really, the New York Times would already be bankrupt if it hadn't gotten a billionaire. The Washington Post would already be bankrupt if it hadn't had a billionaire backing. I mean, these legacy media outlets are now largely turning into artistic projects for liberal billionaires. That's really what's going on. Oh, and also, you don't want to mess with somebody who's got a massive newspaper. You don't pick fights with somebody who buys ink by the barrel, so to speak, or in this case, employs a whole bunch of people to write stuff online. Team, just a quick note. Welcome back to Buck Sexton Show. When President Trump said that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, died like a dog, he kind of said it like that. It reminded me of something. I'm wondering who among you will know this line right out, because there's a part of me that feels like maybe Trump. I'm sure he's seen this movie. Is it possible that Trump got this from the movie? Producer Mark, would you please play Well, I don't want to say what it is. We'll see if people can pick it out before I tell them. Play the clip. You know the one I mean.
Told you about the night he killed your parents. They said your father begged for mercy. Begged. Like a dog.
Like a dog. I mean, he said it just like Trump said it. Just like Trump. Now, I know maybe say it's a common phrase, but I mean, how many of you have ever heard a line from a movie and maybe just sort of said it later without thinking about it? I'm not saying this is, don't tell me this is fake news. I can't prove this, but when Trump gave his initial speech, I was like, that sounds a little bit like, who guessed it, Falcone the gangster talking to Bruce Wayne in Batman Begins. Like a dog. And then, of course, Falcone gets his comeuppance later on. So I was at Politicon over the weekend. I did get to see some of you who listen to the show, which I really do appreciate. I have to tell you, Nashville is a great town. I got nothing. Nashville's fantastic, and I knew it would be. That's why I really want to get to. I keep saying I want to get to Austin. That's top of my list. I really want to get to Austin soon. KLBJ in the house. It's our radio affiliate down in Austin. I really want to get down there. I ate barbecue in Nashville. It was delicious. The food was amazing. The people are awesome. The music scene's fantastic. And there's such a vibrancy to that city now because it's growing so fast. Someone told me there are 40 construction cranes now going in downtown, building all these towers. And anyway, Nashville was a great town. I really enjoyed it. And I'll get into some of what I saw at Politicon in a second. But I want to tell you, single best thing at Politicon for me, single coolest moment by far, was someone who listens to the show, so someone from Team Buck, who's a member of the special operations community, came up and told me that when he was, let's just say, engaged in anti-ISIS operations, his guys were listening to this show. And I thought that was so cool, and I appreciated it so much. And he said that, they like that I have familiarity with what I'm talking about. I've experienced being in some of these places, trying to help the warfighter as a civilian intelligence analyst. But there is no greater compliment that I can have than to be talking about issues of, the fight of what was called the War on Terror, and have the actual warfighters rolling around, and I don't want to say where or how, but rolling around listening to this show on podcast. And appreciating what we do here, and feeling like I'm representing their perspective and what they're doing well enough that they respect this show and they listen to this show. So thank you, sir. I won't name you on there, but thank you for coming up and sharing that with me. And it really made my weekend that guys from the special operations community involved in the anti-ISIS fight like the Buck Sexton Show.
Today in America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. And Rashida took me around her district here in Detroit, and I met with beautiful young people who are going to schools in which they don't have adequate textbooks. They are going to schools where their teachers are forced to work 2 or 3 jobs just to make a living. I don't think it is too much to ask that in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, we pay our teachers a living salary.
Bernie Sanders is just a socialist. I know we're always supposed to say he's a democratic socialist. He's a socialist. So let's start from the real core of his belief system. Yes, he believes in the process of voting, the democratic process of voting. He believes in also the imposition of socialism by the state. That your work, your time, your hours, part of your life that you are devoting to be productive, he can take any amount of that away from you he wants because it's the right thing to do. Because you're too rich, people live in paycheck to paycheck, it's not fair, It's not right. And the richest country in the world should not have teachers with 5 jobs or 10 jobs. I mean, I know he said 2 or 3. First of all, every teacher that I know pretty much has at least more than one job because, yeah, they have 3 months off in the summer. And please, I know this is, some teachers get mad at me. Don't give me this like, oh, but we're just working on lesson plans the whole time. I know some teachers. I've been on some dates with some teachers. I know what really goes on, all right? Don't give me this like, oh, all we do is our teachers are working more than investment bankers. No. Some might, and congratulations, but most don't. In fact, most public school teachers are in, and this is not their fault, although many of them are very supportive of the unions that make this the case, they're in what is really, first and foremost, a jobs program for adults, because that's what the public school system in this country is. It's not really about the children. It's not really about the education. But this was a perfect Bernie Sanders moment here because he said a whole bunch of things that would not withstand much scrutiny at all, but gets the crowd to go, boo, we don't like the rich people. They're taking too much. If they had less, you'd have more. That's the basis of the whole Bernie ideology. If they have less, you'll have more. It doesn't work that way. Paycheck to paycheck. I lived paycheck to paycheck for the first, out of college, at least the first decade of my life. 10 years working paycheck to paycheck. I mean, I was, one uncovered visit from a doctor or, one away from like living on credit cards. For about the first decade, I was running around. And I know what it's like to have worked for many years and go to the ATM machine. I think I was 28 or 29 years old. I remember I went to the ATM machine and I had, what a lot of Americans have, which is that they have trouble paying for a $500 emergency. I went to the ATM. I'd been working for years, working for the government, but I'd moved to New York. I was trying to apply to graduate school and had cashed out my 401k, which is a terrible idea. But you got to do what you got to do. Don't do that, by the way. Go deliver pizzas, work as a burrito, whatever you got to. Don't cash out your 401k. You're just putting yourself in a more difficult position to catch up later on. So don't do as I did with that one. But I know what it is to go to an ATM machine and have less than $1,000 in the bank, and you've been working for years. But, things are expensive, and you got to pay for things. And I was not making much money when I started the federal government. I was not making much money during my time at the NYPD. I mean, I was a government employee. So I understand this concern. I mean, economic anxiety is very real, and we all have it. I mean, the truth is that absolute financial security doesn't really exist. It exists for very few people, and even those people are always worried about not being as rich. Look at how anxious many 100-millionaire and billionaires get. The millionaires, the 100-millionaires. That's what Bernie has to separate out and do, because he's just a lowly, like 10-millionaire or something. He's not a 100-millionaire. That's too much money. But look at the way that they get wound up and anxious about the prospect of becoming slightly less incredibly rich. It worries them. They don't like that idea. Sure, some of them take this giving pledge. They're going to give away a lot of their money, but a lot of them don't. Most of them don't. But paycheck to paycheck, that is a situation that you make better. How? How do you make it better? You make it better by taxing people more and having there be less opportunity for jobs and wage growth for the people that are working. That's not going to do it. That's not going to do it very well. Then you also had him say that the schools don't have textbooks and teachers are poor. I know of many teachers at schools here in New York City who will, I shouldn't say many teachers. I have spoken to several teachers at schools here in New York City that are schools that are almost entirely minority and not high-income background. They're generally low-income minority students, or the entirety or almost the entirety of the student body. The problem is not resources. The problem is not inadequate textbooks. All right, if we're really going to talk about education, that's a whole other discussion, but there's brand new computers in the classrooms. The classrooms all look great. There's tons of money that's being funneled into the public school system in places like New York and D.C. I was in a very poor years ago, very poor in terms of the students' per capita income of their households, poor school in D.C., and all the classrooms are brand new, and they had Mac computers everywhere, and it looked inside like it could be a private school. And the students were all underperforming, and the place was academically a mess. But it wasn't a mess because they didn't have textbooks or, the ceilings were falling in. I'm not saying that doesn't happen anywhere, but this is just not really looking at the problem. And no one's okay with a school that's falling apart. There's asbestos or there's no textbooks or whatever, but that's really not the problem. They can keep pretending that that's really not the problem. In a majority of the schools that you can point to and say that there's a lack of performance. But Bernie Sanders, all he's able to do, or what he does so well, I should say, is prey upon people's envy and whip them up into a kind of outrage and then mobilize that for his own political purposes. And then that brings me to, and I probably should have pulled some from it, but I don't know. I'm not sure I wanted to relive it. I had to do a panel at Politicon where we discussed Medicare for all. And I started out, and there was a Bernie Sanders spokesperson there. I do not remember her name. A progressive pundit, Sally Cohn, and then a very liberal doctor who's like, I have an MD. And it's like, that's great, but you're also super liberal. And he was a psychiatrist, which, as I've told you before, the most liberal people in the medical profession, by the numbers, are psychiatrists. If you want people that are, Jill Stein supporters, go see a shrink. Say, hey, doc, who do you vote for? And then you had, I know him as Kane from, what's Kane's name from the WWE? Producer Mark, you know what I'm talking about? That guy, he's a great guy. Smart dude, too.
Isn't he just Kane?
No, he has a real name. Glenn Jacobs.
I didn't know his real name.
Oh, yeah, Glenn Jacobs.
I had no idea.
Yeah, he's the mayor of, I think, Knoxville, Tennessee. First of all, he is enormous. You see people who are 7-footers, and they tend to be kind of lanky usually. You don't usually see 7-footers who look like they could have, been in Conan the Barbarian back in the day or something. Like, this guy is jacked still. He's a big dude. I'm just saying, it's impressive. You stand next to this guy, you're like, my heavens. And he's a libertarian. And we were having, it's funny because we were trying to represent the reality-based view of the problems in the medical system that we have right now, or rather the problems in getting good care cheaply to people are because of intrusions in the market by the government. It's because you don't have price transparency. It's because different hospitals don't have to compete with each other on price because you can't even know the price. There's all this backroom collusion with insurance companies and providers. They bash the insurance companies all the time on the left, but they forget that the providers are also, just taking people to the cleaners. The providers are often some of the worst offenders, especially within the hospital system in this realm. Just doing everything that they can to squeeze every dollar out of people, especially if you want to pay out of pocket. You should be getting the best deal for paying cash up front. You should be getting the best service. I'm just saying, in a market-based economy, for saying, here is my credit card. Instead, what you get is, you don't have insurance? We're going to charge you 4, 5, 10 times as much as we'll charge an insurance company for the person who walks in after you because of the deal we've struck with them. This is the problem. It's not that hard to understand. Why is it now that my iPhone is so capable? And I don't even want a new iPhone because I'm like, I can't even handle all the stuff that my current iPhone can do. I feel like my iPhone can, recite poetry to me while it gives me a back rub. I just need to learn how to make my iPhone do that. Perhaps while it draws me a warm bubble bath. I'm sure the iPhone probably has an app for that, but I don't know how to do it. But why is it so sophisticated and getting so much cheaper all the time? Because of market forces. I've gone through the process of moving many times, far too many times. Why is it that if you come and you get movers to give you an estimate, once they've given you that estimate, and usually they'll go a little bit over with movers, but you got to give them a big tip. But those guys work hard. I'm a big believer in, tip well. You're never going to be out of money. You're never going to be broke because you tipped people well for the services they give you. Maybe I'm wrong economically, but I'm a big believer in you tip people well always. And, movers, it's standard in New York City, at least. Movers get 20%, which is big. But why is it that when you have movers come, they don't just say, yeah, we'll move you. It's going to cost $50,000. Well, if there was only one moving company and you really needed movers, they could do that. And you'd be paying a whole lot of money for a move. Why is it they'll show up and say, no, it'll be $2,000 or $3,000 to move you? Because there's another moving company that they know you can call, and they're also going to compete on price. Now, there isn't going to be a moving company that shows up and says, hey, we'll do this for you for $100 because they have guys that they have to pay, and they have bills, and they have costs and insurance and expenses. So this is how a price gets set. But it benefits everybody because the price will cover the interest, the cost, the needs of the company providing the service, but also because there's competition in doing that, it will allow the person who is purchasing the service to get the benefit of that competition because everybody wants that business. This is how a market sets a price. When you go in and you say, I've got my toe has turned blue. I think it's broken or something. I broke my big toe a long time ago. That wasn't fun. You can't say to them, hey, what's this going to cost? They can't even tell you. They don't know, and they can't tell you at a hospital in an ER. So, and then what happens is they figure out, well, how can we extract the most money from this person possible? And it's either going to be setting an outrageous out-of-pocket cost for you or just trying to take as much from your insurance company, and then the insurance company fights with them. But this is nonsense. This is the fundamental problem that we have, and that we don't have insurance. What we have is cross-subsidized care all the time. We already have 50% of healthcare spending that the federal government's already doing. We're almost a socialist healthcare system in many ways, not entirely, but in many ways already. And they say, what's your plan? I say, well, my plan would be let people buy an insurance, health insurance, the way they buy any other kind of insurance, have absolute transparency in pricing, and have it mandatory. What is this going to cost? Because one of the reasons insurance companies and providers, especially hospital networks, can get away with what they do is nobody knows what it costs at this place or that place. So the market can't function. And they do this on purpose because it gives them more price-setting power. And they would say to you, well, Buck, if we couldn't do that, though, we'd go bankrupt because Medicare and Medicaid, where the government sets the price, does not cover the cost of the procedures, forces them to operate at a loss. Again, price is central here. They do not operate in a world of prices. And I've just got to tell you, the stuff that was being said from the liberals, the liberal doctor and then the two liberal ladies on the stage, about how the Bernie Sanders healthcare plan is going to function. It was just Fantasyland stuff. I sit here and I still think to myself, they really believe that if we just eliminated all private health insurance, just basically throw the insurers out, have the government standing there, but keep the rest of the system as it is, with the government setting all prices. They don't think that that's going to be a disaster. Disastrous in terms of your ability to get the care you want, disastrous in terms of your wait times, in terms of the cost to the American taxpayer. Everything we have seen in history tells us that this would be catastrophically expensive and deeply dysfunctional. But the Sandinistas, even Democrats realize this is crazy, but the Sandinistas run around saying, oh no, this is great. And if you don't want it, it's because you're like a tool of the rich. I mean, my friends, one of the issues dealing with Medicare for All is it's hard to argue with crazy. Crazy is not an easy debate opponent.
But no, he didn't succeed in his mission because there was inadequate transparency to the American people on whose behalf he was investigating. And when I say inadequate, I mean in two different ways, both in the way in which his report was spun, massaged, and in my view, misconstrued by the Attorney General, and the way in which it was physically presented made it impossible for the American people to have access to it.
Comey's just delusional. He was at Politicon as well. I didn't get a chance to see him. All, 6'11" of him. I didn't get a chance to see him, which wouldn't be helpful anyway. I mean, I just don't think he's a figure worthy of respect or engagement. I've also never met. I loved all those stories from the media back in the day about how people in the FBI were crying when Comey was fired. I really mean this. I have never met a human being who worked with James Comey or knows James Comey who likes him. And I've met a lot of people who worked with him or know him. Never met one who liked him. Now, I'm not saying that there's nobody out there who likes him. Clearly, Patrick Fitzgerald, who's also a very scummy guy, likes him. But I've never met anybody who's like, yeah, he's great. Really solid dude. Nobody says it about him. Yet he's running around telling us, and I'm serious, he said this at Politicon, if Trump wins, he's moving to New Zealand. One can only hope. James Comey, one can only hope.